God from whom all blessings flow. Praise him, all creatures here below. Praise him above, ye heavenly host. Praise Father, Son, and Holy Ghost. Amen.
Hello and welcome to the Agris Church Podcast. I'm Associate Pastor Taylor DeSoto.
And I'm Lead Pastor Dane Johansson.
All right, today we are going to do part 2 of our definitive Greek podcast. Last week we covered what we personally do to learn the Greek language, why we think it's important, and just kind of freeform discuss the topic at large. Today we're going to be talking about the natural method for learning the Greek language, and as well as a little bit of tools for learning conversational Koine. And we're going to actually post a video of conversational pretty soon here,
yes.
I think. So before we get into that...
next week.
Yeah, next week, hopefully, Lord willing. And then after that, we're going to be posting probably a longer podcast on 1689 federalism versus our position, which is what we would just consider more historic Reformed Baptist covenant theology. So hopefully that'll be a good episode. That one was actually requested by one of our viewers. So that's in the pipeline as well. So before we get into the podcast for today, Dane, what are you reading?
I've been just reading a lot of Greek lately, honestly. I've been doing reading my interlinear. So what I've been doing is I'm a big advocate of interlinears.
Right.
They were really popular in the 1800s for acquiring language, not as a crutch or not as a way of not knowing Greek, but as a way of learning Greek or Latin or whatever language it is you're trying to use. So what I do is this morning I was in Matthew 11, so I read Matthew 11 out loud just on my own as I'm looking at the text from the interlinear, and every time I need to, which isn't that often in the Gospels, it's more so in the epistles and stuff. My vocab's not as great. I glance down just to see, or if I need to, the King James is on this side. And then I listen to the Scrivener text being read by a native Greek speaker while I read my King James Bible. So I'm hearing Greek while I'm reading the King James text. Right. And then I do the opposite. I read my TR while I listen to James Earl Jones read the New Testament. So that's pretty cool. So Darth Vader's reading me the New Testament from the KJV as I'm reading along in Greek. And then I listen one more time to the Greek while reading the Greek.
Nice.
And I'm pretty sad. I've pretty much learned all the vocab and the syntax and everything just inductively that way.
Right.
So I've been doing that. Also, we're starting our series on, it's going to just be like studies in the minor prophets tomorrow for men's study at our church. So I've been reading a lot of stuff on the minor prophets.
Nice.
Passé's commentary, George Hutchinson's commentary, The Puritan, on the minor prophets, and really utilizing the Reformation Heritage Study Bible notes as well. So
that's great.
That's been a blessing. So that's mostly what I've been reading, pretty much taking up everything.
And our first study is tomorrow, right?
Right.
On the minor prophets. Yeah, I'm really looking forward to that. So by the time this releases, we'll probably be at that study.
Yeah, seriously. What about yourself?
So I've been reading. So I'm taking the church through a Sunday school series on what it means to be Reformed, and that's essentially talking about what experiential religion is, what it is, experimental religion, sometimes called. So I'm using Puritan Reformed Spirituality by Joel Beeke as sort of an outline, and then supplementing it here and there just to our congregational needs. And then I'm about to do a personal study on prayer. So I'm going to get into basically this week I'm going to read John Bunyan on prayer. It's a Puritan paperback. And then Godly Prayer and Its Answers by John Brown of Whamfrey. And this is Scottish Covenanter. It's supposed to be one of the best on prayer, so I'm really looking forward to that.
And that's a Soli Deo Gloria imprint?
I think I got it from, Soli Deo Gloria, and I got it from Reformation Heritage. It was like on sale or something like that.
They always have the Soli Deo Gloria stuff on sale.
Yeah, it was awesome. Yeah, someone pointed it out, and I just scooped it up. It was like crazy sale.
Yeah.
And then I read a book called Covenant, I think just The Covenant by a particular Baptist from the 19th century. And that was a good read. It was it's really interesting because it seems like there wasn't really one particular Baptist identity, like in that post-confessional period. I mean, you have a lot of different thoughts on covenant theology. So this looked a lot like John Gill, but it was just slight nuance. So that's what I'm reading this week, and then of course just doing my devotions, my daily schedule. If I am able to, I try to get 2 Psalms in, 2 Proverbs, and then my Old and New Testament reading. That's what I try to do daily for that, so that takes some time. And then for Greek study right now, I'm still doing Duolingo, Pimsleur, and then trying to incorporate some listening into my daily schedule. So that's what I'm reading. So the topic for this week is, what is the natural method for learning a language? And so this is not exclusive to just the Greek language, obviously. You can use this with any language, and in fact, people that need to pick up a language really quick, especially for like a business trip or something, will employ this methodology because it's just simply the fastest way to learn a language. So Dane, maybe you can start us off. What is the natural method for learning language at its core?
I mean, it kind of defines itself, a natural method of learning language. There's different names for this and different variations of this, but essentially it's all the same kind of idea, that we acquire a foreign language the same way we would our mother tongue, our native tongue. So just as we grow up learning how to speak English or French or whatever your native tongue is, so the same way when you approach learning a foreign language, rather than just drilling vocab, drilling grammar, drilling all these things, you learn it inductively and intuitively as you would as an infant. Obviously, we already have some better structures, which we'll talk about later, going into it. But that's the bare definition. It's the natural way that a person learns a language their first time around. It's just then doing that again a second time. Which
would make sense, because like if we believe genuinely that we've been created a certain way, that we've been designed a specific way, and that design leads you to learn your first language in a very specific setting, it might stand to reason that that's the way we were designed to learn languages in general. So why not utilize the way that we're designed to help us learn a language? Like, don't make it any more complicated than it needs to be, basically.
Right. We're designed by God to be speaking, revealing creatures, just as He is a revealing and speaking God.
Right. Yeah. And so it's what I think that I'm discovering, just kind of, and we'll talk about this in more depth a little bit later, but I think that like I struggle with this, but when you start learning just grammatical structures and syntax and syntactical categories and everything, like right on the first day of learning a language, I think it actually hampers your ability to grasp a language as a whole, because you're not thinking of it like a language, first of all. So like you're in the completely wrong part of your brain. Yep. It just is very interesting, but I think it actually hampers your acquisition of the language.
Right. I was actually having a great conversation with the OPC pastor who lives here in the Valley. Yeah. We met up and had just an amazing breakfast talking about language and Greek and obviously some theology and stuff too, but mostly just talking about the Greek language and Hebrew and how to learn these things and the methods we've employed. And we both were talking about this, and he's taken like 8 years of seminary Greek. Right? Wow. And so he's saying that now, after he's kind of coming at it from a different angle, more actually almost identical to how we've been advocating.
And did he do this because he heard our stuff, or was he already doing the?
He's already been like thinking this way and employing it for the past however many years. Okay. But like he keeps getting hung up and being like, okay, I need to go back to the grammar translation kind of way. And he said that because the reason I brought that up was because, just like you said, for him, having been trained that way for so long about the grammar translation, that has really hampered his ability to actually comprehend and know the language, because he wants to translate. He wants to know the English equivalent to everything he's trying to see, rather than just letting it be Greek.
Like you're doing a translation in your head, and then you're like, it's like you're putting it through a converter machine.
Right,
like,
which isn't knowing a language, that's decoding a language.
Right, exactly. Well, and so I've got this comment, we're getting a lot of comments on, and we're thinking about pulling the plug completely on Facebook right now, but we're getting a lot of comments basically saying, hey, like, if this method is so good, why aren't people using it? And people are using it.
Right.
In fact, most of the people that actually know the language are employing some method like this.
Right.
Where they're using conversation, and they're using inputs like hearing and speak, and outputs like speaking and things like that.
Writing, composition.
Yeah, like we're not the first people to come along and say this. I think we're just another person coming out and saying this. And our goal with literally everything that we've kind of been doing ministry-wise is just to put like more weight behind certain things that we think are valuable.
Right.
Like we said, we haven't done anything new here. So Dane, what are two things that language proficiency consists of? Like what are the building blocks of proficiency?
Yeah, I mean that's a great question when we talk about language acquisition and all that kind of stuff, and just juxtaposing that with what we just talked about with the grammar translation method.
Right.
That method is from day one. You're learning after you get the alphabet down, the sounds down,
right,
which you're going to talk about usually wrong. Once you get that down, you're going into translating, like right off the bat. You're going into learning about actual Greek grammar or Hebrew grammar and syntax and everything right away. And that's not how you do it. The way you do that, that'll actually hamper comprehension and acquisition, as we said. And this is because language proficiency boils down to the two things, and that's what we're talking about, is listening comprehension and the ability to speak. Right. Obviously, contained within speaking, which is output, would be writing, composition, everything like that. But there's plenty of people who are fluent in languages that can't write it but can speak it. There's people who are fluent in Chinese and Mandarin and everything, learned it as a second or third language, but they don't know how to read the characters or anything like that. So those two things have to be there for comprehension and proficiency in a language. Right.
Well, and something that a lot of people are bringing up, they're like, okay, who cares? They can read it. I get it. Like a 14-year-old in Greece can read the Greek New Testament, but can they understand it? Do they understand the essence of what Paul is saying and his epistles? And I would just say that that's categorically just the wrong question.
Of course.
You can say the same thing about English. You can say a 7-year-old can read an NIV, for example, right? Doesn't mean that they understand the theology of Paul.
No.
Right, so
but they understand the language that's being said.
You still have to teach children theology, and you still have to teach people theology. That's why parents catechize their children. That's why pastors teach and build up their congregation. That's why men do family worship. That is why men go to seminary and get trained. The problem still stands even in your mother tongue, whether it be German or Dutch or Spanish. You can be fluent in the language and still have to acquire theological grammar and theological building blocks. So I think it would be really helpful to this conversation for those that are kind of on the fence but are still like, but even if I'm fluent in Greek, it's not going to help me exegete the scriptures. You have to categorically separate those two and realize that fluency in the language is the first step to doing proper exegesis. You have to know the language before you can learn to exegete. You have to know English before you can exegete an English Bible.
Right.
You can't just learn the grammar of English and then expect to do proper exegesis because you just don't know the language.
Right. That's the same exact thing like you're saying in English. Yeah. And again, just to stress, because we've had to deal with this before, you don't need Greek to know how to exegete the scriptures. Right. We advocate that pastors should learn Greek. That's why we're talking about this stuff. That's why we're doing the Greek in a Year course, which Chris Thomas has put together. I keep forgetting we forgot to plug it last time.
Which a lot of pastors and people are signing up for. There's a lot of hype on it. There's some great prizes as well. There's a lot of incentive to do this Greek in a Year. And honestly, if you stick with the Greek in a Year program, I think that if you're a naysayer or a gainsayer, and if you don't think it's going to work, do it and prove everyone right or prove everyone wrong. At the end of the program, at the end of the year, you're going to either have 50 new fluent Greek readers, or you're not. And then what do you lose? You don't lose anything. You only gain more Greek understanding. Right. It's literally a win-win. You get you have a potential for prizes, and you learn more Greek. How can you?
Yeah, exactly. And so a lot of the people who are interested in this method from the exposure that the documentary has gotten the conversations that have ensued, and a lot of the fruit that's been there from that. Just these great discussions. Either way, people are getting interested in Greek. Yeah. We've said over and over, even though we advocate the pastors should know Greek and Hebrew and try to become proficient in those languages to the best of their abilities with the time frames they have on them, and to use them and be able to interact with commentaries and everything that use them. At the end of the day, most pastors that have studied Greek and Hebrew when they are working with Hebrew and diagramming sentences and everything in Hebrew and Greek, they don't actually know Greek at the end of the day, and they're exegeting their scriptures that they have in English, and that's great and that's fine. A lot of the times you have word studies that are being done, which, you know, as we've talked about, we try to just advocate not to do them unless you absolutely have to. There's obviously a term here and there that you have to do to show the semantic domains of that and how it interprets the theology of the Old Testament coming all the way through the New, etc.
But even then, like, if you trust your translators, like, you know, that's the beauty of having a translation, is that you usually have a team of scholars that theoretically know the language or knew the language better than you do, and you can trust that their translation is a faithful translation. Now, obviously, that's not just blind faith trust. I think there's a lot of bad translations out there. But I think that for us, you know, I think the KJV is a great translation. I can trust the translational choices of the KJV.
Amen.
And now, you know, a lot of people have bought into, I think, honestly, like the lie and the deception that the KJV is just even a bad translation of the text it's translated from. Like, not only is it the wrong text, but it's the bad text.
Right.
I think that's firstly just like crazily ignorant. It's actually wildly ignorant, and the reason that it's wildly ignorant is because the level of scholarship and the level of language acquisition that they had is so far beyond anyone alive today. It's like actually insane that you
even Bart Ehrman has said that.
Right? Yeah, and we've said that on our show before. So like, what is the benefit of understanding the two components of language acquisition? So like in terms of like comprehension. I think like people go into the language studies thinking that they need to have like full comprehension on day one.
Right. No, exactly. So when you're when you're listening and developing this skill, because I mean, let's just define it. Listening comprehension. If I'm speaking to you right now, Taylor, you're speaking to me, or you guys at home or driving, whatever you're doing, listening to the podcast, you're hearing sounds. But if these sounds don't mean anything to you, you're not comprehending them, they're useless to you. They're clanging cymbals and gongs and everything.
Right, yeah.
They're useless.
Yeah.
And same for speaking. If you can't then articulate a thought to somebody in a language, then it's of no use to you, whether you can sound it out on a page or not.
Right.
So with people are afraid of listening comprehension and especially speaking abilities because I mean it is scary. You don't want to feel like a fool. You want to say it right, especially the way seminaries teach you. You have to like translate correctly, or you're going to get a bad grade. Right.
You have to be perfect from day one.
And I've told this to you since you started learning Greek. I always tell this to everybody because it's something that I was told and listened to and learned. I mean, I still just listen to chapters of the Greek and New Testament, and when I was messing around with Hebrew, I would just listen to entire chapters in Hebrew, and I'd understand maybe 20% or 15% of it, which is hardly anything.
Right, yeah.
But I would listen to it over and over and over again to get the cadence of the language, the rhythm of the language, and the sounds of the language. So then when I went and read that chapter again, I've already heard the sounds a whole bunch of times. I know how the pattern goes, and I'm able to then quote it almost from memory because I know the sound patterns. It's the same thing. You just keep putting the sounds in your mind, and you begin then forming them yourself and reading the text out loud, trying to match what's in your head now that you've memorized the sounds with the muscles in your mouth and in your throat and your tongue and everything to formulate these very sounds that you're hearing. And then learning the language becomes way easier because you're adding the definitions and all that kind of stuff into something that's already tangible and real, just like children do, and we'll talk about that. And then speaking fluency, people are always afraid they're going to mess up. You're going to mess up. You're going to look like an idiot. Look at our children do it all the time. Like, it's interesting where Finley and Aaron are at right now, his daughter and my son. Right now they, they have vocabulary words, and there's vocabulary words that you guys understand Finley saying that I'm like, what is she saying? You're like, oh, she's trying to say this. Right. And she's referring to that thing. She's not making the right sound for it. And Aaron does the exact same thing. I understand him. And what he's saying, right? But they're at the point now where they've heard us refer to food, dinner time, couch, dog, ball, toys, TV, whatever, so many times that they associate that sound with the thing itself now, and then they're trying to articulate that object and that concept to you, and it's coming out like it's not the right sound, right? But you know what they're trying to say, right? And so. My point in saying all that is that it's obvious you're going to mess up when you're speaking a new language or a foreign language, just like we do when we're learning. Yep. So it's okay to make mistakes,
and that's actually how you learn anything. So so something that and even in like the secular world, something that's really big right now is this idea of like a growth mindset where the general principle is that failure causes growth. And you need to be comfortable failing, because if you try to be a perfectionist and everything from the start, you end up quitting a lot of things.
Right.
And so especially with language learning, you just have to put yourself out there and not be afraid to make an error when speaking, because someone will correct you.
Right.
And we talked about this last podcast, how it kind of organically happens throughout the conversation, as they'll use the word right and you're like, oh, I used that wrong.
Right.
So, Dane, there's been a lot of talk since we made the documentary concerning pronunciation. And there's even been, I think, a little bit of confusion in terms of why you made the film. And just to make it clear, was it about pronunciation?
The film was not about pronunciation of the Greek language.
Well, so I was there when we were kind of drafting the idea of the film.
Right.
I didn't hear
write the outline.
Yeah, the pronunciation was like sort of a side thing. It was something
contained within the idea of learning modern Greek.
Right. Yeah. It was kind of assumed and implied. It was by no means a foundational thing, but I think it'd be helpful for people to understand why we still think that it's important to ditch Erasmian, and even I think Reconstructive is probably got to go too. Although it's better because it's close. Like I can understand someone speaking Reconstructed.
Well, because you know modern Greek, and the Reconstructed is so close to modern Greek, that's the pronunciation. It's very similar. There's two vowel differences. That's it. Yeah,
it's very close. So what's the deal with pronunciation? Why is this so important, Dean?
Yeah, and is it Gnostic, as we've heard? This has been being repeated all over the internet. We've seen it. Is it Gnostic to talk about pronunciation or say that pronunciation matters? I don't know. You could ask Randal Buth, who is the guy who started the Biblical Language Institute, who was the guy who first even put forward this idea in a formulated mainstream form of learn how to speak biblical Greek, learn how to speak biblical Hebrew, learn how to speak biblical Aramaic, and then you'll actually understand the text way better. And he took all the effort to become absolutely fluent in these things, and to make courses and videos and do intensive immersion courses in Israel, in California, and all these places where you just go and speak Keeney Greek, Koine Greek to people and with people in biblical Hebrew and biblical Greek, and you learn the language that way. So the first thing he did was, okay, we need to know how to pronounce it the way they pronounced it back then.
Right.
And so he came with the Reconstructed, which again is so close to modern that's not really even a different thing. Yeah. And if you're just going to be doing the thing Randal Buth is doing, use the pronunciation he's doing, obviously, but we're advocating for a slightly different thing where it's more holistic, and you can still have Keaney conversations, Koine conversations.
It's so the same kind of it's the same kind of principle. It's like this is a living language, so why not?
Right, and we'll link a lecture to Randal Buth talking about pronunciation in the description below. So is pronunciation vital for comprehension? I would say yes, of course. I mean, that's just a silly question to even ask. Of course, it's vital for comprehension. If you speak sounds that I don't understand and don't mean anything, doesn't matter what the underlying meaning of it is, and if I even know that language, if you're not pronouncing it right, I won't know what you mean at all. We encounter this all the time. If you know an English second language speaker who's come here from a foreign place and learned English, there's oftentimes words that they mispronounce very badly that you're like, wait a minute, what are they trying to say? And then you're able usually to figure it out, but sometimes they butcher it so bad that you're like, I don't know what they're saying. They're saying a word, it's your language. However, you have no idea what they're saying because you pronounce it wrong. And you even did
last week I did an example of how pronunciation changes the language entirely. And in terms of the Erasmian pronunciation, you're literally changing almost every vowel sound.
And many of the consonants.
And many of the like it's just a different language. It's the same alphabet, but you can't...
Completely different sound.
It's just completely different sounds. And because we learn language by sound, it blows my mind that people are still advocating for using that pronunciation. Now there's a lot of people who've done it. Like, obviously, there's people that have done it. But I think we demonstrated quite clearly that pronunciation does change a language. It makes it no longer that language.
Right.
It's like Pig Latin, where it's a little bit different than Pig Latin. But if you used a Middle English or an Old English pronunciation on modern English, you wouldn't be understood.
Right. Or if I pronounced, if I took all of the German equivalents or Dutch equivalents to the same Latin letters that we have in English and pronounced English the way you're supposed to pronounce those words, those same letter combinations in Dutch or German, it would make no sense.
Right. Well, and the people specifically in the sort of debate culture that we live in are always kind of harping on consistency, right? So you need to be able to apply your standard to everything, right? That's always being talked about. So if you're willing to say that pronunciation does not affect a language, then you take that to other languages and say, like, it's okay for me to pronounce every single vowel and consonant a different way.
In German,
right, and then that still be the same language that you're, if people cannot understand what you're saying, then it does not matter. You're literally just a clanging cymbal.
Right. Well, and this is an epidemic within the whole biblical language acquisition paradigm that we're talking about. It's this underlying thing of completely separating biblical Hebrew and biblical Greek into these teeny little categories with this teeny little corpus of material. You pronounce it completely wrong and completely different that no one has ever pronounced. It's not a way to speak Greek. It's not a way to read Greek. It's not a way to sound out Greek. It's this made up thing that was then adapted and used, and so now it doesn't even sound like Greek anymore. Now it's just in this own little cluster of whatever you're going to do with it, and you can just dink around as scholarly exercises with it, and it's no longer part of a bigger whole, which in fact Keeney Greek is part of a bigger whole. It's the same language as modern Greek. It's still Greek. Keeney Greek has continued until the 14 plus million people that speak Greek today. They are the ancestors and speaking the same language as that. It's not a different language. So
it's obviously grown and really honestly shrunk and gotten easier.
Right. Yeah.
But the you often hear that pronunciation is irrelevant because we can't ever know how it did sound. It's
then why not just use the one that people sound?
Why not the one that's available today? And we did the example, I think I made up a system of pronunciation for English. That was like inte verkenning fast deferred, and that's John 1.
Right.
And like that doesn't make sense to the normal English listener, and you wouldn't even call that English. You would say you sound like a really weird guy right now.
I can't even comprehend it.
Right. So people, I think they're saying something like we're just saying only learn modern Greek. You don't need to touch a grammar book. You don't need to do any of that. What would you say to them when they say that?
This is a misconception. It's coming from people who, if you charitably and honestly watch the film plus the other scenes that Pastor Stephen has released on the subject, the deleted scenes of him and I talking about, I think there's 3 of us talking about the methodology of learning Greek and dealing with some of these legitimate questions that people have. No one has ever said, nor are we saying now, and if somebody says this, they are wrong. If you learn modern Greek only and then start trying to read Keaney and everything, you'll understand a great deal of it. You really will. You'll understand a great majority of it as just you'll understand it. Right. However, especially as a native of English speaker or whatever, if you're not a native Greek speaker, they're going to get way more nuances than you are. But even if you became very, very fluent in modern Greek, you're still going to need some necessary syntactical grammar understanding of the language. That doesn't mean it's a different language. It just means you're going to get little nuances just like in the KJV.
Well, just like in English, for example.
That's what I'm saying. Just like in the KJV.
Even in normal colloquial English, like when people forget that everybody goes to school,
right?
And by the time you get to school, you already know language. You already know how to speak your mother tongue pretty well at that point. And by the time you start studying grammar, you probably have read a few chapter books. That's thousands of pages of books already, and then you start to learn grammar. And in fact, you don't really get into the kind of grammar that you learn in seminary until high school, really.
Well, in high school, I've never even heard of such a thing as, in high school when you are studying Shakespeare and you are reading unadapted Shakespeare, maybe they'll have some notes, or the teacher will explain a couple words here and there for you, and tell you that "the" means you and "you" means you, and it's referring to plural versus singular, those kinds of things. But you never take now we'll take in junior year you have to take a class on Elizabethan English grammar and syntax, and specifically study that, and then the next year you can read it. By that time, you already know English so well. You're a fluent English speaker. You've read thousands and thousands and thousands of pages of books in English. You've probably watched thousands of movies, thousands of TV shows. You've had thousands and hundreds of thousands of conversations in English. You are a completely fluent English speaker. So when you come to Shakespeare or even, you know, something like Chaucer or something, you understand a great deal. Obviously, way more in Shakespeare than you would Chaucer, because Chaucer's Middle English. But you're able to. Let's just focus on Shakespeare. No one ever is sitting there being like, "Oh yeah, you know, I should. You know, I don't understand the syntax. I understand the grammar."
Right.
You have to think about a little bit more and everything. But a native Greek speaker is going to understand way more than we are if we become fluent in modern Greek. So anyway, no one is saying learn modern Greek and you'll have to do nothing at all by way of Keaney, direct Koine, New Testament Greek studies.
It's
you get the foundation.
Right. It's the necessary first step.
Right.
It's the necessary first step, and then when you pick up a grammar, it's going to make sense to you. It's not going to be like this great mountain you've got to climb because you already know the language. You're just now understanding how it technically fits,
right,
how it technically works, just like you do with your mother tongue.
Right.
And that's kind of the point of me bringing that up is like people forget how they learned their own mother tongue for some reason. Like they forget they went to school and they learned grammar and they learned all these sorts of things, and you study Shakespeare and you study all of the same sorts of things that you'd be studying in this new target language.
Right.
And so it to me it's crazy that you would take the method that obviously worked for you in your mother language and say, no, we're going to try something completely different because apparently your mother language doesn't work. Like that method didn't work for you.
Right. You're a fluent speaker of it.
Yeah. So obviously you have to study grammar formally at some point. But it's best to comprehend the modern language first.
Right. It's best to get a foundation so you actually you're not going in it completely naked. You're not going in it completely unprepared. You're going in with a foundation of what Greek is, how to speak Greek, how to understand Greek. Even if it's just like an A1 level, you're going in there being like, okay, I get Greek. Okay, now I'm going to learn the specific categories of Keaney Greek, of New Testament Greek. And now you're not going into it completely just like, okay, this is a whole new thing I have to go.
Right.
You just spent 6 months to a year having a blast, learning how to speak, order food, learning how to watch a movie and all this kind of stuff. And you and I have been watching Little Baby Bum in Modern Greek on Netflix. So that's
and also funny. Boss Baby.
Oh, that's what I meant. Yeah. Boss Baby, but Little Baby Bum too. Yeah. But yeah, Boss Baby. We've been watching that in Modern Greek, and it's hilarious. You know what I mean? To
this
do
little
that.
baby with the colloquial Modern Greek is so funny.
Right. Yeah, and it's like so you get to do all this fun stuff, and now you have a foundation to go into Keeney Greek and be like, oh, what is that? And then when you realize that you're like, oh, that has turned into this in modern. You're like, okay, I see the similarity here. I see the
like I see how it worked.
Right.
And the natural method. So you have this like building block and of this foundational component of essentially I'm learning the language the same way that I naturally learned my first language. Right. And when you're naturally learning your first language, the grammar is implicitly learned. Right. So you for example, you could be using a very advanced grammatical function, and not know what it's called.
Right. Or
but
why it happens.
But you know how to use it and when to use it.
Right.
But you pick it up slowly. Like first, think about how a child learns. First they say, ball, and then they say my ball. And then they learn how to interact with that object with various grammar.
Please give me my ball.
Yeah, please give that to me, or mine, or they understand the idea of possession, and they understand all these sorts of grammatical terms that we might understand, but they learn it progressively. So they don't
never told it.
Right, and you don't sit there like okay, you just said this in the accusative, right? It's like no, that's not how you teach a child language.
No.
And so in the natural method, you learn in a predictable order the grammatical functions of the language, just like you would when you're a child. And you honestly, I think the funniest thing is that most people in their mother tongue do not know what each word that they're using is called.
Yeah, the parts of speech.
Yeah, they don't know the parts of speech.
And you don't need to know the language.
Yeah, so like jumping like directly straight to advanced grammar, it's weird.
Yeah, I mean with lots of courses like SMBA, which I like SMBA's grammar, but I mean if you within that, I think it's like the fifth lesson, you're translating a sentence out of 1 Corinthians, and you're like, 1 Corinthians, that's like metaphysical, theological, concepts that are not like, tangible, immediate
Right.
concepts like you find in the Gospels, like
Right.
give me a drink, and then he walked there, and then they did this, and
Yeah.
they had this many things, and they gave them
Right.
to these people. Those are all concepts that we can easily grasp in our but instead it's like Jesus and his death and his resurrection, all this kind of stuff. You're like, whoa, that that's a little advanced to for the first like couple months
Right.
of you studying Greek.
Well, then you're not actually I hear a lot of people saying, yeah, I translated 1 John in seminary. It's like, no, you took a lexicon and you used it as a key. Like you lined up all the characters and then you looked next to it for the English.
Well, yeah, and I was talking to that pastor today, and he was like, yeah, I've translated like a large portion of the New Testament.
Yeah.
Like a decent chunk of the New Testament. Like I've translated myself from Greek to English, either in my sermon preparations over the years or in seminary courses and extensive syntactical studies and things like that.
Right.
And he goes, and I don't know Greek.
So I think that speaks a lot to the idea that you can functionally operate as a pastor without actually having fluency. Like,
Right.
And I think one of the problems, and we'll talk about this in a second, is sort of the bare necessities mindset that I think the seminaries are really at fault for.
Yep.
Right? They say just learn just enough to get through your life as a pastor. Just learn the bare minimum. You got to focus on various church growth strategies and marketing and counseling and all that. Some things of those are important that they change out for biblical languages. But I think that we've been learning that the pastors who can actually like do that, and even though he says he doesn't know, I think he probably knows Greek better than most people that say that they don't know.
Oh, well, yeah, of course.
That they know.
Yeah.
But for a lot of people, that's functionally all they need, and
Right.
so they have no aspirations, and the people that actually know the language are the ones that have invested just a lot of time.
Hundreds and hundreds of hours.
Right.
Another thing I wanted to touch on that very thing, and I think it gives a good illustration of it,
Yeah.
is that so the method that's usually used is you learn a bunch of facts about the language, like just facts. This is how this is a genitive, this is an accusative, this is an aorist tense, this is an aorist passive, an aorist
Right.
imperfect, this is an infinitive, you learn the building blocks of the language, and you just see it as building blocks, and that's it. And you try to piece them together and all this kind of stuff. You know a bunch of facts about Greek. You know tons about Greek. You do know a lot about Greek.
Right. Yeah.
But it's kind of like if I knew a bunch of facts about you.
Yeah.
Like if I'd never met you and I was just like, Taylor he went to ASU. Taylor has a daughter and a wife. Taylor likes to do this. Taylor has these things. And I could tell you, people can do that with celebrities. They can give you like a biography of a celebrity. They've never met him or talked to him.
Right.
It's the same as knowing a bunch of facts about you versus knowing you yourself. And having intimate knowledge of you and speaking with you and actually seeing how those things have affected you and changed you, et cetera, et cetera. It's the same thing with this language acquisition. So if you can know a bunch of facts about Greek and not know Greek at all, and I know that doesn't click with people a lot, but you have to see it as they're separate things. You can know a ton of facts about it and not know it at all. So to know Greek is to interact with Greek, to have it as a living language within you that you think in, that you can speak, that you can write in, that when you are reading it, you're not translating it into English, because all you're doing then is knowing facts about it. You're not knowing the language itself.
Right. And we talk a lot about what's your language goal. Like, what are you trying to accomplish?
Yeah.
And I think that if you're going to invest hundreds of hours into trying to pick up a language, do it in such a way that's the most productive way possible, right? Like that just makes sense to me. But in terms of the natural method, to kind of like steer us back into the natural method conversation, Dane, what is comprehensible input? Like, what's that buzzword mean?
Comprehensible input is input that's comprehensible.
Yeah, okay.
It's self-explanatory, but what that means and what that actually looks like is if my... Again, we'll use children as an example.
It's a great example.
Right. If I read to a 5-year-old, the some of the poetry of John Milton, say Paradise Lost,
right,
or a Shakespeare play, or even a modern like thriller novel,
right,
or a young adult novel or whatever,
right.
it will be completely meaningless. That's not comprehensible input. There's too many unknown vocabulary words. There's too many unknown cultural references and categories and things like that. It's not comprehensible because there's nothing he understands. There's not enough words that he actually comprehends.
Which is why you can't just like drop someone in a foreign language and expect, or into a foreign country without any knowledge and expect them to do it.
Right. Or I mean, they're gonna have to do a whole lot of work to try to get.
You have to like get up to a basic level of like.
Right. Yeah. That you can actually understand kind of what's going on and all that kind of stuff. Yeah. For instance, if you're learning Koine Greek, you're learning New Testament Greek. There's such things as graded readers and things like that. Like this is a great one. It's a beginner's reader grammar for the New Testament Greek. Yeah. I'll plug it out. I don't know how to say these guys' names right now. It's too late at night. But we'll plug it. We'll link it. But in the back, this reader, it's retellings of stories. It only uses 301 of the most common words in the Greek New Testament, but it uses them in all sorts of different forms that they appear in all their, the aorist, passive, all this kind of stuff. It'll use them a bunch of ways to where you actually see them in the New Testament all the time. Right, yeah. And so it uses the 301 most frequent words over and over again in different forms and retells a lot of the stories. Right, yeah. This is comprehensible input. Or say you... John is going to be more comprehensible. A familiar story in John where you know most of that vocab, where John has a smaller amount of vocab versus when you go read Luke or Acts. Right. Comprehensible input has to be enough of the input that's going to help you grow in your understanding versus and solidify what you already know and gain some more versus something that if there's 1,000 words you don't know and you only know 100 of them, that's not going to be helpful at all to you. Right. But if you know 950 of those words and it's just repeating the same stuff over and over again and you add 50 more, that's going to be super helpful. That's comprehensible input.
Yeah, and I found even in conversational, when you're doing conversational Koine or conversational modern, functioning within what you comprehend to pick up new terms is actually really helpful to solidify, first of all, the vocabulary that you already have, and to actually comprehend the new words that you're picking up. Mm-hmm. You could ask let's just I do this to my with my daughter all the time. I say, Finley, where is this? Go get that. Mm-hmm. And I'll name the item, and she'll look around and she'll go and identify it and run and go get the thing. Right. And when she starts to be able to talk, she'll learn words like what is this? What is that? Right. And I'm trying to think of what we do. We did this the other day when we were sitting here having our conversation. We were saying what's the author of this book, or how many volumes is in this set. And you can say what is that?
Yeah. What we were doing this in Keaney just as for fun. We were talking in Keaney to each other.
Yeah. What would you say Koine, and then you would just say right?
That'd be modern. Yeah. Yeah. Exactly.
Koine, and then you say topotiri.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then you would just say that's a cup. And now if Dane didn't know that, then he now knows that that's a potiri. That's a cup.
Yeah, and that's a way of inductively learning, just like we do as a child. That's part of the natural method. Is Christoph Rico, where's his book? Christoph Rico, he teaches conversational Keaney in Jerusalem at the Polis Institute. Right. This book is called Speaking Ancient Greek as a Living Language, Level 1, Students Volume, and it's called Polis, so you can look this up. I'll also link this. And this is just all in Keeney Greek, and it's all conversations and stuff, so it's the textbook they use in their courses, and it comes with a student's manual as well that has all the translations.
When'd you get that?
Huh?
When'd you get that?
Years ago.
Oh man.
Yeah. Okay. So also, I was telling you this about this book the other day. Okay. That it's the same kind of thing with this. It's by Hale. I forget the guy's first name. And he goes over grammar and stuff, but he retells stories in Greek.
That's awesome.
And he makes you say write out loud, or write in Greek, and then also say these things. It goes
from
Greek.
English to Greek, which is the hardest part. You need to know how to do that.
Look at lesson 5. It's a retelling and comprehensible input of what they've learned so far up to lesson 5. Right. It's called Dr. Lazarus, and you read this silly little made up story about who Lazarus was, and he was a doctor. Right. And it's all really really easy stuff. That's all comprehensible. Right. So
So instead of taking you have to learn 1 50 vocab words at a time, you're learning what is that, and you picking up using your vocabulary that you already comprehend to pick up new vocabulary.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
So we're kind of running close to time here, but maybe let's talk about some helpful things that you could say in Greek for those of you that are interested in picking up conversational. and then we'll talk a little bit about some of the problems with the bare necessities mindset. So Dane, what are some phrases, I guess, that are helpful?
I mean, right off the bat, if you're learning modern, you'll want to be able to say hello, and that's yasas if you're speaking to multiple people, or yasu if you're speaking to one. You can also, in a formal setting, say hierete, which is directly from from hiere and hierete in the Keaney New Testament.
Keaney,
and then you can also just say ya. You can say ya for hello and goodbye, just ya, yasas, yasu, ya. You'll obviously want to say yes and no as well. Ne is yes. Ohi is no. Good morning. Like, what is good morning? You remember?
Kalimera.
Kalimera, and then the afternoon, kalispera.
Kalispera. Night, kalinita.
Kalinita. No. Kses, simeron, avrion. That's yesterday, today, tomorrow. Another thing that's really helpful and that I used a lot when I was in Cyprus. So I wanted to stay in Greek as much, especially when everyone else is having conversations Greek around me.
Right.
I would ask, ti legete blank, and I would add the English word, or point at what someone was doing or a thing. Ti legete sta linika. So how do you say this in Greek? Kind of like in como se dice
en español. You would say something like that. And that's super helpful. Like I could say ti legete sta linika.
Yeah. Vivlos.
Nah. And then you just say catalaveno.
Yeah, catalaveno, I understand. And that's another one. Then catalaveno is I don't understand, so I don't comprehend if someone is saying something. You go, signomi, like excuse me, I don't understand. Or then catalaveno, signomi. Can you repeat that? I don't understand. Can you try to use something different? That's basically what that means. And then if you don't know the answer to a question or something, you say then xero. Then xero, I don't understand. Knowing how to ask for something. Remember how to like if you're like, I would like.
Yeah, thaithala.
Thaithala. Yeah, thaithala is always.
It's like thaithala on the fowl.
Thaithala on the fowl. I want to eat.
I want to eat.
Yeah, that's a good one to know.
Like thaithala on the fowl kati Torah.
Yeah, I want to eat something.
I want to eat something right now. Like, let's go get some food.
Right, and that's great when you're in Greece, especially with all the good Greek food. Yeah, I mean, when I was in Greek the whole time, obviously, look at me. I was like, ta ήθελα να φάω. Tora. So,
well, and then even if you wanted to use like Koine, like you could say like das mi parakolo, like
dos mi parakolo.
Dos mi, sorry,
give that to me.
Get that Erasmus out of here.
Yeah,
dos mi parakolo.
Dos mi parakolo.
So but that's how you work on the language. You take your vocab that you have and you implement it practically.
Right.
And so we used a lot of modern there, but even if you were at seminary, for example, and we really want to plug this, like if you're still, if you're in seminary right now and you're learning Greek, and your professors are not going to get on board with this at all.
With the modern,
like what you should be doing is taking the vocabulary that you know and starting conversational Koine groups.
Within the students in your class.
Yeah, with the people that literally are all stressed about the same material. They're all, everyone's sweating and they're all saying, how are we going to learn this? Get together and have extended conversations in the vocab that you know.
Yeah, use what you have. There's all sorts of tools and resources online. I've plugged a bunch of stuff. Speaking Keeney Greek will give you a lot of great phrases. It's a phrasebook to help you kind of navigate conversations and stuff. Also, and you can do this if you're forced to use Erasmus. You can still do this in Erasmus. In fact, Christoph Rico uses the Erasmus and using conversation stuff. I don't agree with that, and I think it's dumb. But whatever, do what you can with what you got. And people are stressed out. How can I cram this material? How can I cram that? Let's get together and just talk about it in Keeney Greek. Then that way you're having fun, you're socializing, you're fellowshipping, and you're practicing your Greek, and you're going to solidify it way more than you ever would. And that's kind of why we're going to do, we were thinking about doing dual conversations, like one modern, one that, like in the same video, we'll have a conversation in modern, then we'll have it in Keaney, but I think we're thinking more about just specifically aiming at the seminary student stuff. We might still do one. You'll see when it comes out, I guess, where we just do it in Keaney, so you guys can be listening to.
So we want to start releasing these things to help people that are trying to learn, like we said from the very beginning, like we are excited to help people learn, and we don't want to be a part of the problem.
Right.
So for those that want to use the modern, we are going to start doing conversational Koine in modern pronunciation.
Right.
And then all of us are slamming on Duolingo right now. Like there's the leader chart is insane. There's people putting in like 1,000 points a week right now.
The people.
On me. Yeah. Sorry,
yeah.
Ime.
Yeah. So okay. So here's a common I would say canard, but it's also a good question. There's people who are honestly asking this. Okay, Taylor, you guys have propagated this method. You made a documentary with some polarizing figures. You've done this thing. Now there's this group going to learn Greek in a year. It's this awesome course through university. There's a bunch of great prizes, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, I understand what you guys are doing. That's cool and all. But what if I just want to learn? I just want to learn how to read the New Testament. I just want to. My goal is just to know enough New Testament for exegesis.
I would say you can't read without understanding. Like you can't like if you don't have a high enough vocabulary, how are you going to actually read something?
Like it's a pretty basic
right
question.
like that's kind of the idea is that you can't actually know how grammar works if you don't know the language. Like you can understand it technically, but how many I was reading through, I've read through like a few grammars. I've worked through one and read parts of other ones. Let me be more precise there. Like how many times, Dane, does it say this is the rule, but here's 50 exceptions?
Just like in any language. It's
It's
a living language.
In every single language in Spanish and especially with English.
Yeah, English is a mashup of a bunch of
different it's horrible, the exceptions. But how do you learn if someone were to ask you why do you pronounce it that way over this way, or why does this mean that but not that? You would say, I just know. Like that's just how it is.
Right. Otiutosestin is what they used to say to their kids. Just like we say to our kids, and you say to children. Yeah. Everyone has that experience with children who are like, I eated 7 fishes. Well, most of that sentence was wrong. It was all the right building blocks. Right. But then you say, and they're using the rules they've learned. They've learned you put ed at the end of a verb for past tense. Right. I eated. And you would say, no, you ate. I ate, not you eat it. And they go, why? And you go, that's just the way English works. And they say, well, I fished. Or I went fishing.
Did I fish?
Right, exactly. I walked. Why is it not I waked? You know what I mean?
Right, yeah.
No, I ate. And they ask, why? Well, it's just the way it is. And, well, why not fish is? Why is it still fish? If it's fish in singular and plural, you're like, that's just how it is. That's just how English works. And they're like, well, that's dumb. And you're like, yes, it is.
So it's actually, first of all, there's two benefits, or there's 2 reasons why you need to actually know the language fluently to understand grammar, because the actual exceptions aren't just a memorization program.
No.
You know the exceptions because you've used the exceptions, and it's just natural for you to understand that's just the way it goes.
Right.
Why is this seemingly feminine verb conjugating this weird way?
Right. Why are the declensions of a feminine noun masculine?
Right, exactly. Yeah. Like, that's just the way it is.
Yeah.
But instead, now you have a whole seminar on why pneuma is like...
Yeah, why toponevma neuter looks like and acts like a feminine in a lot of ways, where you're like, it just does. Like,
right. So,
but not even consistently throughout of it. It's not like it always lacks feminine. So it's just interesting. So I mean, why do I need to know how to speak, read, write, and comprehend and have proficiency in language if all I want to do is know how to read the New Testament and that's it? Right. I want to know how to read and translate the New Testament and use it for exegesis. The answer is because you cannot read without understanding. Right. If you're reading and you don't understand it, it's no use. Yeah. You cannot understand without a high vocabulary. And you can't get a high vocabulary without reading a lot and hearing a lot and using a lot. And you cannot know how grammar works, which is made up of words that mean something, if you do not comprehend the language. So even if your goal is just, well, I just need to know grammar to do exegesis, well, I would say you can't know grammar. You can know the rules of grammar, but you're not actually going to understand why or how that thing's working if you don't know the language. You can't comprehend it.
And that's actually really, really dangerous. Because talk about consistency. Take that argument and apply it to French. Take that argument and apply it to German, to English, to any other language. You wouldn't let someone doing this with another language come within 10 feet to exegete your mother tongue.
Right.
You would not let them do it from a pulpit.
Right.
And we have seen time and time and time again these seminarians coming out zealous, with their Greek knowledge and absolutely butchering exegesis because that's just what they know. They're like, well, the grammar checks out. I'm right because I know the grammar. Uh-huh. And then you go and you read commentaries from men that knew the language a lot better, and they're like, they just are running circles around that.
Right. And they're like, yeah, that's the rule, but that's not actually how it works here.
Right. Yeah. And so I've seen this so many times, especially on Facebook, how these people that most of them have gone to seminary, but a lot of them haven't, and they've just used some online tool, and they make some seriously grave errors.
Yep.
Exegetical errors, that because they're so focused on this mindset that the Greek contains some sort of like secret information in it.
Gnostic information.
And that's why we're saying our position is anti-Gnostic, by the way.
Right.
Because when you take the Greek and you don't view it as a language, you view it as something to be parsed and dissected and examined and analyzed.
Right.
And when you look at it like that and you take out and atomize a word, you pull it out of its context and do work on it, you're going to come out with the wrong meaning probably.
Right.
Right,
yeah, and word study is usually best done not by taking and atomizing it, which is usually how you see word studies done. But for instance, I had to do a word study for Makarios, and show how it was a continuity between the Old Testament Beatitudes. Makarios means blessed in the New Testament. Blessed, blessed are you when you're persecuted. Makari. So Makarios is the Greek equivalent of Ashrei in Hebrew.
Right.
So the only reason I did word study there, and I wasn't sitting there pulling out, well, this is genitive form or dative or plural, or
right, yeah,
and therefore because it's being used here, grammar told me this. I'm showing the continuity of how the Old Testament understanding of Ashrei went into Makarios in the New Testament, and so that was a word study. That's the only time, and I hate doing word studies, but it was helpful to the theology of the text.
Right, yeah.
You're not supposed to just pull something out of its context,
right?
And just look at it as this Greek word has all these parts and does this.
We just have to get out of this bare necessities mindset. I think.
And guys who ostensibly know Greek are calling it Gnostic to try to know Greek fluently, and that's just absurd and beyond me, beyond what I can't comprehend it. It's not comprehensible input to me.
Right. Yeah.
When I hear that, no comprehendo.
So like we have to we just have to abandon this idea. Okay, the New Testament has X amount of words.
Yeah, it's bare necessities.
Like if in order for me to know 75% of the words on the page, I'm going to learn 3,000 of these words. I mean, not even that much usually.
No, it's usually 500.
500 to 1,000 usually. But like, you actually need to know between like 91 and 96%, right?
Actually, Alexander Argelius, I used to think it was that. He was talking about literacy.
Who's Alexander Argelius? He's my doppelganger,
like
right?
The world. No. He's like the polyglot of the world, where he says, I know 4 languages. Okay. He says he knows 4 languages because he knows European, Semitic, Asian, and African. He puts the languages he knows by continent. Like that's the kind of guy he is, where he literally is just fluent in all these languages. He's like the polyglot.
He's the dude.
Yeah, he's the dude. Like he literally has written papers about that.
Right. Yeah.
And he's like, I'm not, he's like, now that I just understand all of these languages, I see that they're all just part of one language.
So how many words per page is that like that you like don't know?
So he said that you have to know 98% of the words on a page. And people are like, whoa, that's really high.
Right.
So what that actually boils down to is if on a page, say a page has 300 words.
Right.
So he gives his exact example. If it's 300 words on a page, you have to know everything on that page except 5 or 6. If you don't know more than 5 or 6 words on a page of 300 words, you won't be able to comprehend it the way you need to.
Well, and
for extensive reading.
You know what's really crazy? I was like thinking about this.
So that's not bare necessities.
No, I was thinking about this the other day because I was thinking like, okay, how many words do I just infer from context that I don't actually know? And I sat there and I forget what I was. I think I was reading something, and I think probably one of the books I read this week, and I just slowed down for a second and I was like, okay, how many words do I not actually could I not ace on a vocabulary test? There was probably 3 or 4 per page.
Right.
Where I knew the meaning from context, but if I were to do, I would if I dictionaried them, Google looked them up on Google, I would probably be in the right ballpark. But if it was a school vocabulary test, I'm not getting that word right.
Right.
Because I was in the right ballpark, but on a vocab test, sorry, that's not how they work. You have to have the exact syntactical.
Well, and that's flashcards and all that kind of stuff train you to do that.
Right.
And guess what, guys? It's not cutting it if you know the 350 of the most common words in Greek.
You won't be able to read. You won't be able to read the first page of John.
No, you won't, because those 301 words or 300, and because like that's what I was talking about that grammar earlier. It takes the 301 most common words and then conjugates them a whole bunch of different ways. So you're actually each one of those words every time it conjugates is technically a new term.
Right. Yeah. It's technically a new word. So
right. That's what people don't understand. Like I remember when I learned erchome, I come or I go. Erchome. And I was like, oh, cool, I know erchome. And then I went into the New Testament, and over and over and over again, you see ilthen. Ilthen and ilthe. And I was like, what is ilthen? What the stink is this? And so I looked it up in an analytical lexicon that I had, and I was trying to find this thing, and I had to go. I somehow found that it was because I couldn't even find a dictionary. I couldn't find a lexicon, anything. There is no word ilthen in the dictionary. There is no word ilthen in the lexicon because it's a conjugated form of erchome. So finally, when I found it, I was like, it's erchome, and it was like one of those moments where I was like, what has happened? I was like, I was blown away because I was like, okay, this is the reason this is because it's a second aorist verb. So in its aorist form, it changes its stem, and that's not fair. And so essentially, when you learn ilthen, he came or he went, or he, she, it came or went, that's a new word to erchome. So learning erchome is not the same as learning ilthen. Ilthen is a different word. So anyway, we're not talking about the 300 most common words that you know on the page. You'll know the root of a lot of words on a page. Right. That's when Mount says, now you know 85% of the words in the New Testament. Right. Because he does that every chapter gives you the percentage of words you know. That is the most misleading thing. I really wish he hadn't done that to me because he betrayed me, I felt like. Right, because you're like, allegedly I should be able to read my Bible now. And I should be able to read 85% of the words on the page. And by root, I could. Technically, I knew 85% of the words, their root. Right. I did not actually know those words because they had changed form. So, anyway, we have to get the idea of bare necessities completely out of our mind. Right. You can't do that because a lot of the most common words. But they're little. They're conjunctions or prepositions and particles. So in the Greek New Testament, there's 5,400 words, a little bit more than that, roughly 5,400 words. There's no reason you shouldn't be able to learn all of those, and you'd be good to go as far as knowing all of the root forms of all the words in the Greek New Testament, but you'd still have to learn their inflected forms, and that only comes by exposure and the methods that we've been talking about, learning how to read, speak, comprehend everything. Learning just grammar and vocab terms is not going to help you reach that level of proficiency where you understand the language as Greek. And you hear about that's a hapax legomena. You hear that all the time, which is a word that's only used once, twice, 3 times in the New Testament. So many. Right, yeah. The great majority of the words on a page are only found, 15 times or less in the New Testament. And you're like, what? How could I possibly how would this? And the reason this is because we look at it and we're like, oh, this is a small body of literature. So in this small body of literature in the New Testament, we're talking about these words that are used once or twice. Well, guess what? In ancient Greek, patristic Greek, Attic Greek, modern Greek, if you take it holistically, the language like we're advocating for and just learn all of the Greek, attack it from every angle you can, and any Greek is good for you learning Greek. You realize that a word that you thought was, oh, this is only used once or twice in the New Testament, how will I ever learn this? Because you don't come across it often. In studying your Attic stuff, you've come across it 55 times in the course of your studies, or in modern, you come across it all the time, and now you realize that's not a hapax legomena anymore. It's a word that you know right off the bat. Well, and that's the crazy thing when people are saying like classical Greek is a completely different language. Like if you work through Athanase, like you're building grammar you're gonna see in the New Testament. Right. And if you do Duolingo, you're building like vocab that you're gonna see in the New Testament. Like all the time. Yeah. And so it's actually crazy to me that people like are so unwilling to think like that they have to hold on to what their favorite scholar has said. And someone asked me, I don't want to make people mad when I say this, but someone asked me honestly and earnestly, why are they still teaching it in seminary if this is just plainly clear that you can do this method to great success? Mm-hmm. And I think part of the problem in Daniel Street really uncovered was that a lot of these New Testament professors, first of all, teach New Testament for 2 years. It's like a stepping stone to New Testament Greek? Yeah, New Testament Greek, sorry. Yeah. New Testament Greek for 2 years as sort of an interim position. Before they teach the epistles of Paul or something. Right. And there's that. And then there's also tenured New Testament Greek teachers
that just know grammar, and it's not their fault at all. This is just like the system.
Right, it's not like these people are like evil.
Yeah, no, like they actually probably know Greek a lot better than most people, but but they couldn't switch to the new method without probably a year or two of investment
in that article that Daniel Street wrote, where he gave that lecture and that talk at that place and gave the test and everything. He said that there was all the guys writing the major grammars in that audience of 35. Yeah. Obviously, it's not going to name names, but you can deduce names. I mean, there's only a few major grammars out. Mounts, S.M. Baugh, Stanley Porter, those kind of guys.
Right.
Wallace, those kind of people. So, I mean, we don't... He's like, I'm not going to name names, winky face. Right. So he's being nice. But he said in the talks he had after with all these Greek professors and stuff, they're like, I would love to teach a class in Koine Greek. Right. I would love to teach Greek in Greek. A lot of them were like, that is awesome. I wish I could do that. Right, yeah. However, I don't know Greek that well, and nor do I think I ever will. And I don't have the time to learn Greek.
Right.
They all said, I don't know Greek, so I can't teach Greek in Greek.
Yep. And that's a really big problem. And you have the guys like Randal Buth who are basically saying, like, that time is coming, guys. So, there's...
Like the old paths where it will be taught in that language.
And everyone has heard of sort of the bureaucracy of seminaries, right? Mm-hmm. Like, you have a pecking order, and you have hierarchies, and you have all of this tenure situation going on where there's a lot of politics involved. Right. Long story short, there's a lot of politics involved, and so if you're going to change a methodology, overall, you probably have to root out the department. Mm-hmm. You probably have to get them all out and bring in fresh faces. But there are seminaries doing this, guys. Like that's something that I think a lot of people are missing here, is there are going to be seminaries that are starting to do this stuff now, and they're going to be the seminaries that are pumping out and producing fluent Greek readers and speakers and guys that are actually going to be able to, that are probably going to be sort of like Erasmus when he learned Greek and was like, wait a minute, what are they teaching?
Right, and we talked about this a bit in the documentary, and people were like, I need evidence of this and stuff. Right. I mean, some of the stuff is a little scanty and hard to find, exactly because you have to look, into the whole Renaissance itself and the methodologies used. Again, they weren't, they didn't go on, medieval.org and download like, Mounce's grammar, you know what I mean? Like there was no ancient Greek grammar. There was no Koine Greek grammar when Erasmus was learning Greek, when Stephanus was learning Greek, all that kind of stuff. They were developing them after that. But how Erasmus learned Greek, and I'll post it because the book's over there. I'm not gonna go up and get it. We'll post the quote and the references and stuff. In the description below. Take a note of that. These guys, so just take Erasmus for example. He learned Greek this way. There was modern Greek speakers that had fled and already were having Renaissance in Italy at the time. He went to Italy because some of his scholar friends had learned Greek this way, and they were all pushing him, you need to learn Greek, you need to learn Greek. He was already fluent in Latin because that's how they taught Latin, was by just speaking Latin to each other, reading Latin, writing Latin, speaking Latin all the time. Everything was in Latin. Right. Even though Latin was a dead language at that time as well. Mm-hmm. But they learned this dead language that way, and so... Right. How they learned Greek, they're like, oh, well, Greek's not dead. Great. So they went and learned Greek from modern Greek speakers, which at the time is not at all how it is now. The demotiki, the spoken Greek of the people now, is different than the Greek was in the 1500s when Erasmus. The Greek of the 1500s was way closer to medieval Greek, which was basically Keaney Greek. Medieval Greek,
super close to Keaney.
When we talk about Byzantine Greek and medieval Greek and stuff, that's really, really close to patristic Greek, which patristic Greek is Keaney Greek. There is no such thing as patristic Greek. Patristic Greek is Keaney Greek. Right. Yeah. So all this stuff was the continuity of the Greek language, and I've seen people getting in trouble. And confused this way. They're trying to compare. Well, English has changed so much in the past 1,000 years, from Anglo-Saxon, which is actually a completely different language, to
completely Germanic,
to colloquial English that we speak today. Yeah, you're right. In 1,000 years it has, but Greek has not changed that much in 2,000 years. In fact, it's stayed extremely stable because of the Greek Church. The Greek-speaking Church used Keaney up through the medieval ages. In their courts, in their liturgy, that was a spoken language of the courts. That was a spoken language of the church. They spoke Keaney Greek, not just modern Greek, but anyway, their modern Greek even up until the 1970s with the katharevousa, the Greek people used in their books and their plays and their newspapers and their literature was so close to Keaney. It's not even funny. They even still had the dative and stuff in it.
Yeah.
Whereas the Demotiki is really not that different from katharevousa, and it is different than katharevousa, and so we're looking at the farthest thing from the Keaney New Testament is modern Greek, and it's not that different. There's differences, of course. We're not saying there's no differences. There are differences, but it's not like Greek from Keaney to modern is not at all comparable to English from Anglo-Saxon or even from Chaucer to now. There's way more of a difference between an English in 1,000 years or even in 700 years than there is in Greek in 2,000. And that's just a fact that people know. Anyway, my point, just to tie that with Erasmus, was that Erasmus studied modern Greek or studied Keaney Greek by learning modern Greek first. Once he had mastered modern Greek and spent time in Italy with these Greek Renaissance guys, he then went and just started with Homer and Xenophon and Thucydides and Erastus and all of these people from ancient Greek literature in through the Keaney, all the way through the Byzantine. He learned Greek holistically, and this is how Luther did it. He even talks about how he taught Latin to his kids, to the German people, and talking about learning Greek and Latin. This is how they all did it. Stephanus, they all learned Keaney Greek by learning modern Greek, and then these guys dorked out and talked like we're going to be doing in Keaney Greek. They wrote each other letters in Keaney Greek and ancient Greek and stuff.
And we do that, but Facebook.
Right? Yeah. But they acquired a knowledge of ancient Greek and Keaney Greek and everything by learning modern Greek. So this is a historical method. Again, we're not coming up with some new thing where it's like let's leave the old paths behind. No, this is a new thing that came around with the Enlightenment and everything, and that kind of goes into what we're going to talk about. Yeah.
So the grammar translation, or what is it? Yeah, the grammar translation way of learning Greek. That's a post-Enlightenment thing. That's like a modern thing.
Right.
And so this, to tie what you're just saying now back to the hapax legomena, like the whole point is there's so many of these only occurring once or twice words that are common use in the Greek language.
Right.
Absolutely common use in the Greek language.
Yeah.
So it instead of viewing them as I was talking to my wife the other day, I was like, how often do you use the word run? She's like, I don't think I've used the word run in probably 5 days. And I was like, is that an extremely rare word in English? She's like, no, it's a pretty common word. It's one of the first words you learn. And that's how a lot of these hapax legomena are. Right. And so if you just take the time and actually learn the language, you're just going to breeze through the hapax legomena.
Right. They're not going to be hapax legomena anymore. They're just hapax legomena in the Greek New Testament. But if you now read patristic Greek, and you can read the Shepherd of Hermas, and you can read Byzantine Greek, and you can read Attic Greek especially will help, and you can speak modern Greek and listen to a Greek television show. Once you have all that down, you're not going to have hapax legomena anymore.
And this isn't a 10-year effort.
No, this is just a couple of years of working at it.
Right. We have people keep continuing to tell us that Keaney Greek, biblical Greek, is a completely different language from modern Greek. And they cite a video, and I saw a certain individual who was like just slandering us on the internet use this example. He's like, I've seen a video where these guys go around and ask Greek speakers if they know ancient Greek. And of course they're going to say they don't know ancient Greek, because ancient Greek would be like us understanding and recognizing Beowulf.
Or even Chaucer.
It's a completely different language. Ancient Greek is not biblical Greek, and some people, I think, might think that it is because they haven't actually tested it themselves.
Exactly. If you go and show native Greek speakers Keaney Greek, patristic Greek, they're going to do just fine with it.
Right.
You go up to them and say, Mi ni nai the theapili adio achilios. If you do that in dactylic hexameter, what I just quoted was the opening words of the Iliad, Homer's Iliad in the Greek. and you have to use a hexameter, a dactylic hexameter is what it's called, from dactyle, from your finger, because it follows the same pattern as your finger. So dactylic hexameter, that's how it was recited, and that's what it sounds like. It has a meter to it. That's not intelligible. Of course it's not.
Right. They're not going to understand that.
Right. Whereas en archi no logos, que logos in proston theon, que theos in logos. That's completely intelligible.
That was just John 1.
Right.
So like it's I think that needs to be put to bed, you guys.
Yeah.
Like if you guys watch the show and have the
show.
What's that?
The documentary?
No, this show.
Oh, this show. Okay.
Our podcast.
Okay.
If you guys watch our show, like tell people like that's just wrong. I was talking to someone the other day, and this guy was like, "It's very obvious that these are two different languages." And I was like, "Sir, I'm sorry. With all due respect, you're just plain wrong here." That like, and he was trying to say I made a logical fallacy. All I did was state a fact.
But then the guy showed his hand by saying that the Puritans and the KJV is a demonstration of that as well. That's a different language.
Oh well. Can't win them all, guys.
Which this is a very common thing. Mark Ward says that, and you're gonna, he's not saying that exact thing, but he is by saying that it's not, you can't read the Puritans unless they're updated. You can't read the King James unless it's updated or has extensive helps and stuff, and that's just blatantly false. There's people that tell that to Joel Beakey. Tell that to these people who read the Puritans for a living and relish them. I read the Puritans all the time. I've never ever. Well, I mean, obviously there was a time where I had to transition into their way they spoke and the way they wrote, and they had an entire page would be one paragraph and one thought with all these sub points and everything like that. But I mean, you get used to it.
The problem is, I mean, like, hate to drop names, but guys like Mark Jones, who's apparently a Puritan scholar, he says he can't read the KJV.
Then you can't read the Puritans.
Right. So there's inconsistency.
Then you can't read the Puritans.
There's inconsistency in this, you guys. Right. Like I honestly have no doubt that Mark Jones can read the KJV. He can read the KJV. I just think he doesn't want to, and that's kind of the general posturing of most people. Is like, first of all, like, they are smart. First of all, like, Mark Jones is a smart guy. He's a scholar, right? Like he has scholarly work done. I think he can understand the KJV, and I think most people can understand the KJV, especially if you read the Puritans. Like, if you read the Puritans, you can understand the KJV. So I think I've said this before, but I think that people are doing.
But how many people are reading the Puritans?
Well, people say they read the Puritans, but they, because I don't know, maybe they read. I don't know. But you're doing yourself a disservice when you say that you cannot read the Puritans or you cannot read the KJV. It's like, obviously it's going to take a little bit more thinky power. Like you're going to have to apply your brain a little bit more, but you can do it. You can totally do it. And last note on that, I think I might have just forgotten it actually, but yeah, you're doing yourself a disservice if you say you can't actually read the language. But that's the idea that's being put forth, and it's effective, you guys. If you propagate that idea, you're winning. Congratulations. You've convinced English speakers that they do not know English.
Right.
Like that's what you've done. That's the fruit of your labor.
And you have cut them off from their own heritage that is their birthright as English-speaking Christians. The KJV is your birthright, because in the KJV is all the grammatical language and theological grammar, if you will, that is contained in the Puritans, in those who came before us, that will never match, that we should always go back to and always test ourselves against. That's as good as it gets. That's a golden age of theology, of Christian English literature and theology. That's the golden age, and we're going to sit there and forsake it. The Covenanters that followed after, and even, probably died with Spurgeon, you know what I mean? And all he did was quote the Puritans all day long. So.
Right. And I was talking to a pastor today who pastors out on the other side, what do they call it, the other side of the pond? Is that the proper terminology?
The lake.
And he preaches from the KJV. And English is definitely not his first language.
Farsi.
Farsi is his first language, and English might not even be his second language. I forget. He has languages under his belt. He understands the KJV just fine, perfectly fine. But I think if someone who has English as their second or third or fourth language can understand the KJV, I think you as an English speaker should take pride in being able to understand the Puritans, and should take pride in understanding the KJV. This is I mean, at the end of the day, here's where this is what this kind of mentality produces. It gives Crossway just open license to republish all the Puritans and make a ton of money from you.
They're coming out with another translation of Calvin. They think Battle's translation is like outdated and archaic. If you cannot read the translation of Calvin that was done in the 60s, I don't even have words for you. You're telling me that the 1960s English is archaic? How many ways can you translate the thing from Latin and French into English? I'd rather read it in Beveridge's translation that had some dignity left into it.
Right.
This is not Reformed. This is not historically Christian. This is post Enlightenment garbage.
The whole kernel of the critical text position, it lays on a foundation of changing the way that people learn Greek so they don't actually know it. Mm-hmm. It lays on the foundation of this idea that the text was lost to the church for 1,800 years. Right. It lays on the foundation of liberalism, on the post-Enlightenment, and commercialism. Like, that's not conspiracy theory. That's literally just what happened.
The other view is that, you know, these conspiracies, Erasmian myths, and these all these that's all conspiracy.
Right. Yeah. It's literally there's an active. We were talking about this in we have a group chat for the noble short bus worth of TR advocates, like all 5 of us, and we were talking about how there seems to be a very active effort to slam the authorized version. It's so painfully clear. The craziest thing is that there almost does seem to be a narrative being pushed from the seminary textbooks, from the seminaries.
Naselli?
Yeah, like literally, the textbook says that the KJV is a completely different language.
He said he was bilingual.
He was bilingual because he understood the and this is a textbook that they are literally putting in the seminaries.
Put out by Presbyterian Reformed Publishing.
Yeah, so you're telling your seminarians, that are gonna be doctors, that they can't understand the KJV. They shouldn't try to understand the KJV. Wow. Mind-blowing. It is mind-blowing.
Mind-numbing, mind-blowing.
It starts with the languages. You can read the KJV, you can read the Puritans, especially if you're a seminarian and you have any aspiration to the pulpit. You got to be able to do it. So that's been it for Agros Church Podcast. We talked a lot about the natural method for learning language. We talked about how we think this matters in terms of the textual discussion. We talked about how this matters in terms of just exegetical scholarship, and the pastorate and the people that we're training up to be pastors. I think we're doing our pastors a disservice, our seminarians a disservice.
And thus the church.
And thus the people of God that sit in the pews a disservice by teaching the languages this way, by teaching Reformation history in such a way where Erasmus and Stephanus and Beza are made fools. I think that it does a huge disservice to God and to man and to the church and to everybody, the seminarians that are pouring in thousands of dollars to these programs. So that this does matter. It's not unimportant. And I don't think that anyone is really shouting loudly about this stuff. So we're going to keep shouting loudly about it. Thank you for tuning in. I'm Associate Pastor Taylor DeSoto.
Lead Pastor Dane Johansson.
We'll see you next time. God bless.
Praise God from whom all blessings flow. Praise Him, all creatures here below.